Hello everyone, my name is Hakan Keles and I'm an academic architect and illustrator from Turkey. Today I'm gonna present you expanded frame, time and space, 80s urban atmosphere at Arabacıoğlu's panorama pages. This is the content of the presentation. It has 5 chapters. Lefebvre says comics should be studied from 3 angles: institutional, formal and content. I will use this method in relation with space, urban life and spatial representation in this case. Firstly, I will draw a theoretical background. From the father of the modern comic Topfer until today, a stylized drawing explains a story could have defined as a graphic narrative and been produced in different formats, which are cartoon, comic strip, comics, and graphic novels. Any analysis of comic book form has to begin with the foundational unit of a comic page, the panel. Gronstein and Chute emphasizes that reading a graphic narrative shouldn't be necessarily linear or only left to right way. It could offer a density which is often a layering temporalities that the reader then decodes. These layers often constructed on the distinction between story and discourse layers of the narrative. As a meaningful combination of diegetic space of the story and the extra diegetic space of the page could create different kind of spatiotemporal reading experiences. In this manner, expanding panel could create different layers of time-space unity and a multimodal reading. These 3 examples shows us that as a comic page and a comic strip page, one single space, one perspective, but multiple moments and linear reading. As a cartoon page, one single expanded space and perspective, one single moment as story time, but as discourse time there is multiple non-linear multidirectional time creation, not like root, more like rhizome, as Deleuze mentions. We don't see expanded frame just in comics and cartoons. For example, in this puzzle illustration of Hastern, every character does an action and creates time. The more we watch, an individual narrative is created organically from a single moment. Coming back to graphic narrative, the similarity between the modernity and layout of the page is another important manner for this case. Fraser and Groenstein mentions about the analogy between architecture and comic page. There is a lot of comic and cartoon examples that use section of a building as panel organization. These examples are from Spain. The relation between graphic narrative and architecture and urban studies might have been so much different dimensions from I mentioned before. Fraser says, along with semiotics, history and sociology, the discipline of urban geography must also be seen as crucial for the development of comic studies, acknowledging the importance of matters of space place for artistic forms, including the spatial medium of comics and graphic novels, fosters further contributions to the interdisciplinary field of urban studies. Also, Sur says the parallel evolution of the modernity and comics is not a purely spatiotemporal coincidence. Newspapers and thus comics were in fact a medium primarily located in cities. Now I will give a short brief of cartoon and comics in Turkey in relation with spatial representation. Visual culture in Turkey unfortunately not so rich until 19th century. We know these miniatures, which are some kind of 2D map of the daily life and the cities produced under the control of empire. One of the most important characteristic of Turkish miniatures is their documentary value. Miniatures can tell us more about daily life than can be learned from the written sources alone. In these miniatures there is no knowledge or perspective, they are some kind of map. Coming to 90s, 2 publication formats have affected the development of comics in Turkey: magazines and newspapers. Comics only existed as strips in those media. Because there were not many experienced and qualified artists, comic strips of the era were few in number and raw in quality. At the time of late Ottoman, the first humor magazine was Diogen. It did not live long because of the censorship politics of the empire, but it's important because we can say it started some kind of a tradition, especially in Istanbul. Kalem and Karagöz were other magazines published before Turkish Republic. The content of the magazines were humor-centric. Cemil Cem was one of the first to be considered as cartoonist, his works heavily based on political and moral issues. After the Turkish Republic, different magazines have been published. Akbaba was the most popular one and was a big supporter of the new democratic regime. The magazine wasn't being criticizing the politics of the government, so the content was mostly based on stereotype humor. But at those years, the modernization of the Istanbul was one of the most popular topics of the cartoonists. Daily life of the newly established republic has been visible from the new urbanization process of the city. So much architecture and urban-based cartoons has been published as a new thing in Turkey. Coming to first comics, the comic strip format with speech balloons and continuous stories as we know it today come to the scene in Turkey 1930s via children's magazines and newspapers. After the year of 1935, the American comics craze had found a place in Turkey as well as Europe. Then Italian comics, aka fumettis, such as Pecos Bill, Zagor, Tex and Kinova replaced American comics in magazines, ironically with Western genre stories featuring even more American characters. But these important comics was mostly based on action, and because of their form and style, architectural and spatial information was not an important element. Comics production in Turkey has never developed into a full-fledged industry branch. Local comics that were financed and supported by newspaper publishers could not rival foreign publications, neither on a quantitative nor on qualitative basis. Therefore, it is of no surprise that even during the years 1955 and 1975, generally known as the golden age of comics in Turkey, no locally produced children's comics attained widespread popularity. Country saw the creation of many significant comics such as Karaoğlan by Suat Yalas, Abdülcambaz by Surhan Selçuk, and Sezgin Burak Tarkan. In this period, comics were published daily in the form of comic strips in newspapers, which would mostly be compiled in full-length comic books after their daily publication. Karaoğlan and Tarkan was similar to Fumettis as form, and they were based on heroic narratives of Turkish history. Abdülcambaz, on the other hand, was a unique production of style and content. Coming to 70s, Oğuz Aral's Gırgır started to be published in 1972 as a promotional item of Gün newspaper, and a year later became a genuine magazine by itself. The political tension in society regularly induced brawls, lynches and even murders. Streets were not safe, but Gırgır somehow became a common ground which the supporters of both rival parties, the Justice Party and the Republican People's Party, enjoyed and laughed at, but after 90s it changed and didn't be effective. During the late 60s, peasant migration exploded as people left small villages to seek a better life in the cities, particularly in Istanbul. On the outskirts of the cities, they constructed shanty towns, called a psychological universe for the people, which became poignant architectural symbols of man's striving. By the 80s, these shanty towns had begun to expand their boundaries further into the city. This migration, or so-called urbanization, was felt on every level of Turkish society. Unlike the previous generation of humorists in Turkey, who defined their styles as graphic non-verbal humor and strived to produce universal works of art, Oğuz Aral and his followers preferred the local humor rising from the streets. Gırgır encapsulated the culture of and sense of humor of the shanty towns and slum areas and employed the language of the people with a heavy use of slang. Gırgır and its founder Aral had played an important role in teaching the trade of comics to new cartoonists, employing and tutoring them at the same time and playing a vital role in many important artists. By the 80s, sales number was around 500,000, believed to be the third largest worldwide among humor magazines after Mad and Crocodile. Tunç says that Gırgır was full of continued strips dealing with high adventure and domestic issues, featuring characters representative of the common people with their daily problems, hopes and beliefs. Most were male, poor, unattractive, sex-starved and mediocre in intelligence. By doing this, the style of Oğuz Aral and the magazine same time could be considered as cartoon mode. Vitek explains the cartoon mode is marked by simplified and exaggerated characters which are created primarily by line and contour. Panel backgrounds and physical settings are often minimally represented. Little attempt is made to create a sustained illusion of three-dimensional space by such means as shading or the use of linear perspective. As a result of the style, the content of the magazine was mostly character-based. Cartoons, comic strips, and comics were there in every week, but the diegetic space was not defined. Mostly simple 2D background and silhouettes were visible as interior or exterior, and not much urban quality emphasized. Sometimes some vistas, like a bridge or tower, appear if the event occurs in some specific place. But the panorama pages of Arabacıoğlu was a different form of graphic narrative and a whole form based on the diegetic space created. It offers a multimodal reading utilizing the urban atmosphere of the 80s Istanbul. To talk about the panorama pages, I should make clear the artist career firstly. Bülent Arabacıoğlu was born in Eskişehir in 1950. He is an engineer, but he worked as a cartoonist and illustrator for a lot of newspapers, magazines, and advertising companies. He mentioned once that he wanted to be an architect when he was young. He is known mostly about the characters he created, such as Tipi Tip and Rıdvan the Most Heroic. Tipi Tip was a comic strip character coming out from a Chibi Gum with the same name. Rıdvan was a comic character published weekly on Gırgır at the same years with panorama pages. Rıdvan published 1980 and 1989, two pages each week. It was based on action and gag humor. The concept was Tintin-like but not defined diegetic space because it published weekly and humor and jokes have been maximized with the small panels focused on characters. 11 Long Adventures of Rıdvan has published as comic books for the first time since 2011. It wasn't possible before because of the copyright problems. Same situations is going on for a lot of different productions in Turkey. Coming to panorama pages, it still doesn't have an album because of the same copyright reasons. It's also related with production process. Almost every page is created with collaboration with different humorists. Each panorama page has around 20 jokes according to the theme. Each joke has 2 or 3 characters and balloons. It published in one full page and the whole content was organized in one diegetic space. There was interior, exterior and intersection settings in the page. Coming back to Lefebvre's trio, the context, the content and the form of each page was dependent to architectural environment Arabacıoğlu created. The subparameters of the context are weekly published, full page, 80s daily life and urbanization as I mentioned before. The subparameters of the content are theme, jokes, characters, balloon and settings. And the subparameters of the form are mise-en-scene and framing, including projection and border. Architectural and urban quality and all subparameters defines each other, bidirectional. To analyze the case in an architectural and spatial manner, I will look at the relation between content and form and their subparameters. Let's start with look closer to one example's content. This page's theme is susceptibility or maybe oversensitivity we can say. Arabacıoğlu created it with the collaboration with Erdoğan. The page has 23 jokes in total. These are the characters of this page. There was a lot of stereotypes appear every week. Jokes were serving the theme by coming from daily life contradictions on every level, like rich and poor, vulgar and civilized, religious and secular, male and female. Fraser quoted from Henry Lefebvre saying that after industrial revolution and capitalist economy, everyday urban life then became a battleground. If we think these years of Turkey were the fastest about liberalization of economic and urban politics, it was not surprising the consequences of capitalism were so much visible on the urban stage. Fraser says about this industrialization and urbanism under capitalism have thus been responsible for the splintering of space and time in general homogeneity and the crashing of natural rhythms and cycles by linearity. Also, there was only one type repetitive every panorama page. He was drawing himself every week in a different mode like a flaneur or observer of the urban stage. Talking about setting, each joke and action was settled either interior, exterior or at the intersection of these two spaces. Here, setting includes the location, the number of the characters and the speech balloons. About this example, 23 of these settings organized all together. As I mentioned before, the form of the panorama pages are directly related to architectural environment and its representation. In this manner, quoted from Lefebvre, mise-en-scene means organization of the elements in the frame to create the diegetic world, and framing means perspective choice and the borders. I ignore borders because the frame is stable with a full page size in this case. This is a short animation to show how the mise-en-scene and framing work with the panorama pages. So, according to these definitions, I narrowed my scope and chose 16 cases to analyze. By doing this, I ignore some samples like the ones which doesn't have any urban atmosphere. Their content and form are non-related in my perspective. Also, some examples have direct relation between their content and form. For example, the theme is hospital and the created space is also a hospital. I ignore them too. According to this framework, I choose 16 examples to find meaningful patterns about creating process of each urban atmosphere, which are susceptibility, inegritude, we all fear, we all fight, arabesque, incompetence, nights, a strange sexuality, education, our hidden sides, our obsessions, love story, Beyoğlu, we enjoy ourselves, coerce, we agitated. To make the analyzing easily, I produced a clean architectural drawing from each 16 pages that made clear to see Cartesian space and the urban atmosphere Arabacıoğlu created. This is the final architectural representation of the page titled Susceptibility. There is no facade information because the reader sees inside the walls like a comic panel. Shadows added by me to see three-dimensionality of the environment. These are all the 16 panorama pages I choose to analyze. We see the titles of each page with random arrangement. So, the findings of the analyzing process came to life at two steps. First, I organized the cases according to content-form relation to make visible a meaningful pattern and topology. Then I checked the mise-en-scene and projection decisions. To create this topology, I calculated interior, exterior and intersection settings for each page, how many jokes include a page and what percentage of them are either interior, exterior or intersected. According to the numbers I find, I made a new arrangement of the pages. As the percentage of exterior increases, pages go to the upper right. As the percentage of interior increases, pages go to the bottom left, and the intersection increases, pages go to the diagonal direction. So, according to this new arrangement, some of the correlations between content and form became visible. For example, most interior settings are on the page themed Our Hidden Sides. If we think the phrase hidden sides connotes private life, it's understandable to be each joke occurs indoors. According to the new topology, we also see that when exterior increases, public spaces and squares gets bigger. When intersection increases, urban quality and its sophistication increases. When interior increases, public space disappears and we just see big building blocks. Now, on our new chart, let's check some mise-en-scene and projection decisions. Arabacıoğlu used 2 or 3 point perspective at almost all the pages. Horizon line sometimes disappears and mostly on the upper side of the page. So we can say he put the camera at a higher point to see much ground and put all the characters on the space. Also, in order to gain more space, sometimes he extrudes the ground level and uses z-axis. This also creates a richer urban complexity. As we highlight the car roads, we can say that they are getting bigger when the exterior settings increases. Same thing is valid for the urban voids for pedestrians. Another interesting point is that the lack of natural and green areas at almost all the urban atmospheres. This gives us a hint about the urbanization politics of Turkey at these years. Using all the data I find from analyzing, I wanted to decipher the main approach of the artist while creating these urban atmospheres. I sketched a rough plan scheme of each page and rotate them according to same point of view. It has been visible that he uses diagonal point of view to make feel three-dimensionality more effective. Also, three types of plan schemes become visible. First one is O-type, which is a big void surrounded by buildings. Second one, X-type, which includes crossing streets in different directions. And the last one, Z-type, it creates a depth with zigzag located building blocks. As we put this finding to the chart, we can say that these plan types are changing according to theme itself. If there is more exterior settings, he uses X and O type mostly. At the intersection, all the types are useful, but if there is so much interior jokes, he creates urban atmosphere using Z-type plan. As conclusion, I should say that I worked on Panorama Pages as an architect and checked how architectural environment has established. But it's obvious Arabacaoğlu's works are very rich, either in content and formal way, and one can analyze them in a various ways and methods. Also, here are my last notes. Comic studies emerges thanks to its interdisciplinary nature. Turkey has a rich graphic narrative legacy. Especially Gırgır is a container of data to be analyzed as sociological, political, technical ways. It's a representative of 80s daily life and urban environment. Panorama Pages would be considered as a visionary narrative method. It offers a different kind of spatio-temporal reading experience for its time. Its sophisticated architectural quality serves the context, the content, and the form at the same time. The field of architecture and comic studies should have more interaction, both academic and practical sides. Thank you for your listening.